Good evening once again. As Mr. Kingston just said, we are after all here to talk and think about HIV and AIDS. And I guess it's high time we did. There is a need not only to talk about how to prevent and how to protect ourselves from this disease, but also to talk about how to live with HIV. Most of us might not really see it as a serious problem because for the simple fact that we don't see people who are HIV positive around us. And we are to blame for that. Because we as society are giving the message that we don't want you around. And why don't we want you around? All that stems from a simple question of, how did you get AIDS? I mean, how did you get HIV? And why is it so important to ask this one simple question of, how did you get HIV? Well, because we all want to know, were you a saint or were you not a saint? And it gives us great pleasure in wanting to know the answer to that question. There is a stigma attached to this disease, maybe in other countries too, but definitely more so in India, because one of the causes, as we all know, happens to be through sex. And of course, that is the tabooed word in India. That is something we never talk about. We might do everything we want to behind closed doors, but we will never talk about sex. Until we don't, we will never be able to combat this disease. Because every time you say we don't want to talk about it, you are saying, okay, HIV, come and get us, because we don't have the guts to stand up and say, we will fight you. So the HIV will definitely get the better of you, as it already is. You might not know this, but India already is a country that has the single largest number of HIV infections. Yes, the single largest number of HIV infections. For all you know, there might be people in this very audience who are HIV positive. There just might be, you will never know. Some of them might know, whereas some of them might not even know. Probably the person sitting right next to you is HIV positive. Well, maybe he isn't, but the point is that you do not know, because he's leading a perfectly healthy, normal, and productive life. Then why do we need to discriminate? Why do we need to shun people who are HIV positive? If you and I can't even make out if they're HIV positive, they go on living a perfectly healthy, normal life, but we say that no, because you are HIV positive, you do not have a right to live with us. Why? Are you forgetting that you sitting over there are just as vulnerable as that person who does have HIV positive? Probably you are, because that's why you're sitting so smugly and saying, aha, you've got it, I don't. But my dear, you just might get it too. Just remember that. And then probably you won't think of the factor of us and them, because you might be them very soon. We've heard a lot about discrimination against people with HIV. There have been some terrible cases. I mean, there have been cases like people have had to leave their jobs, children have been forced to leave school, even extreme cases wherein families have disowned their own people because they are HIV positive. Can you imagine your parents disowning you just because you're HIV positive? It's happened to some people, it just might happen to you. There have been even worse cases. I'll just give one such example. There was a top executive in Madras who was admitted in hospital for some minor ailment, and while he was there, the hospital staff tested him for HIV. He happened to test positive. The staff did not tell him that he was HIV positive. Instead, they discharged him as soon as possible. And of course, in the true Indian manner, they just washed their hands off him and told him he was absolutely fine and that he could go back to work. So this man, the very next day, goes back to office, gets into the lift, and the lift man doesn't let him in. He just doesn't let him in. And ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about somebody who's a top executive in a firm, not about somebody who's in the lower level management or anything, but somebody who's used to certain facilities in his organization. And he is told that he cannot go back. He walks on, he goes upstairs. Some of the subordinates look at him and they just they back off. Now what is this man going through? He has entered office thinking that he's a perfectly healthy individual who's going back to work. Everybody around him passes nasty remarks, shuns him. And somewhere along the day, somebody just happens to tell him that, "Arey, tu to HIV positive hai," or something to that effect. Here is a man who is absolutely competent. He knows his job. He knows how to do his job. But suddenly, nobody wants him. What's happened? Overnight, he's HIV positive. That's what's happened. And we don't know how to deal with it. That's what's happened. So he has to suffer the consequences. This man eventually committed suicide. Unable to bear the humiliation of being told that he's HIV positive and incapable of being a productive member of society, he just lost hope. This is not something that happens to just one such person. People who work with HIV, people who work with people who are HIV, tell us that in 90% of the cases, when a person is told that he's HIV positive, one of the first few thoughts that cross his mind is of suicide. Why? You don't think of suicide when you're told you have cancer. You don't think of suicide when you're told you have tuberculosis. They're just as fatal a disease. Then why does that person think of suicide when he's told he has HIV, that he's HIV positive? Firstly, because we have spread this thing about HIV, that HIV equal to death, HIV equal to discrimination, HIV equal to you have no right to live. That is why the person who is HIV probably thinks of committing suicide. Whereas that is not true. A person who is HIV positive can lead a perfectly healthy, normal, productive life for quite a few years. But we don't let him. That's the problem. We are too scared to say that you are a part of our society. We are just too scared. Until we remain scared, this virus is going to keep getting the better of us. Because you and I have to take the initiative. We have to take the initiative to create the atmosphere of inclusion and not exclusion. Because if you have an atmosphere of exclusion, the person who's HIV positive will never have the courage, will never want to tell you that, look, I'm HIV positive. I too have a right to live on, and I want you to be just the way you were to me before you knew I was HIV positive. It might be difficult for you to visualize this, but perhaps if for a moment you just think of this, what if you yourself are HIV positive? What if you don't know about it yet? What if from a year from now you happen to be HIV positive? Probably that will help you visualize yourself in that situation. And the next time you meet a person who's HIV positive, hopefully you will have the attitude of tolerance and of acceptance. Because I think acceptance is the one thing which is definitely needed to combat HIV. Because still the people who are HIV positive remain underground. We can never combat this disease. And this is what we are here for. This concert, Shared Rights and Shared Responsibilities, is to express our solidarity with those who are living with AIDS. It's an attempt to say, without being patronizing, we are with you.